X account is very interesting because you're not shy. And I think what you're trying to do is probably oversight and remaining true despite caring about many people in the administration and the president and vice president. You're going to stand firm on your convictions about, especially as I'm thinking today, about immigration, deportation, etc. Is that a pretty good assessment of where you are?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I am a staunch supporter of President Trump, a golden escalator guy, but I also recognize that he's fighting against a lot of forces that want to hold him back and reduce his mandate to something less than what was promised. I think we learned anything from the first administration is that the best thing you can do is provide rightward support. It can't just all be, emanating from the left. And so having a vocal presence out there kind of pushing and encouraging and holding to account our friends and allies to do the things we all know need to be done, I think is tremendously important because we're in trouble as a country. Very deep, deep trouble. And there's multiple existential crises that we must confront all at the same time, whether it's immigration, whether it's trade, whether it's faith and family. You can go down the list. And President Trump has to balance them all, and he's got a short window to do it. And so that's why the fighting spirit is there. We're on a war footing to get things done.
That's good to know because I think it's very easy to get soft when you love the guy in office, right? When you know he's there for the right reason, but it's easy to get soft and not hold an administration up to critique, friendly, constructive criticism. And that's good that you are committed to being strong on those things. Were you as shocked as I was that national or Mexican nationals would be riding in LA carrying Mexican flags and calling out Viva Mexico and all of that? Were you really deeply shocked that after having 20 to 40 million illegals, aliens in the United States over the past 20, 30 years has brought us to this point?
No, not at all. 0% shocked. 100% appalled, 0% shocked. I mean, this country, through large-scale immigration, both legal and illegal, the failure to assimilate, the left's longstanding project to destroy patriotism in this country, to embrace violence and rioting, all culminated in what we saw. And I'll add on top of that, particularly as looking back to the Russia hope, when the left invented this narrative that the foreign officials of Russia over there were manipulating domestic politics and swinging elections, I constantly yelled, and no one paid attention, is people who are actually doing that right now are Mexico. Their foreign policy largely hinges on them manipulating our domestic policy. And the president of Mexico recently came out at a press conference and said just that. We will mobilize our people within the United States. It's a long-held ideological position of Mexican radicals that basically the Southwest United States was taken from them, and their plan to take it is through illegal migration or legal migration, and they view it that way. And when you don't assimilate people, you allow different national identities in the United States to basically take primacy over the American identity, of course they're going to be waving the Mexican flag.
When the president of Mexico spoke those words, she said, mobilize, which to me is a bit belligerent. It sounds like deploying troops or perhaps not troops, but people that have been placed in California in particular, but across the country that are truly Mexican nationalists and are here for a subversive purpose. I don't know. But it also, when she said that she doesn't want our people harmed as if America is known for harming foreign nationals, and Mexico doesn't have the problem with the federales and the cartels. And two, then she said, over there, and couldn't even say the United States of America, but then on the other side of the border. It was as if she didn't even recognize, or the other side of the river, I'm not sure, that there was actually um, a border between these two nations, and that she was speaking of another nation's sovereignty, and that those people that she's speaking of mobilizing are either one, here illegally, and she's greatly contributed to that, or her country has, or two, that they're now naturalized citizens and they better darn well not be mobilized by her. The whole thing was really repulsive and actually made me angry.
I don't know why, frankly. We closed the Russian embassy for far less after the 2016, Russia. And during that time period, I don't know why the Mexican embassy and consulate network is allowed to continue to operate freely to agitate and mobilize inside the United States. In fact, we had an undercover team not too long ago go out and obtain footage of a former Mexican consulate worker advising illegal aliens as to how to evade, obstruct, and avoid ICE. And so these are like the types of people that the Mexican diplomats send up here to work the system and work their people. And there's millions of them. And I think a large proportion of them, whether citizens or not, would declare a primary allegiance to Mexico over the United States. And that's a huge problem. We got the same problem with China, by the way. And all these blow out of the water kind of the major muscle movements this country did over the Russia hoax. So I would encourage our friends in the administration to kind of use that precedent to punish Mexico and really shut this stuff down.
I agree with you wholly. And we have, I'm not sure why we have so many consulates. Well, I know why. I'm not sure why we're allowing so many Chinese consulates across the country. Tell them to shut down those consulates, because they're part of their forward strategy of I would say controlling their subversives that are in the United States and punishing those who are not following the party line of spying, but are actually assimilating into the United States. I'm not sure about how many Mexican consulates we have. Do you know?
I knew at one point it's like over 20. There's a lot, and they
Why
work
is
hand in
that? What
glove.
are they supposedly used for?
So like you go in there, if you're a Mexican in the United States, you like update your visa or do some business back formally with like the government of Mexico. But they're also used for like programming and activism and advocacy and frankly lobbying. And they work with the nonprofit sector, which we've discovered in recent years. It's vastly supported by taxpayer funding and used to undermine the national interest. All of this is married up in one big soup of radical activism, and we allow it to happen on our own soil. Like these foreign operatives basically staging operations on our own soil. It's not diplomacy, it's subversion.
Okay, this is not yet a popular take, I don't think, in America, but I'll say what I've grown to understand from our investigations into the H-1B, OPT, guest worker visa debacle that is in the United States, is that India, though not a belligerent pointing nukes at us like China, is truly using its consulates, working with NGOs and with business to make sure that that they manipulate the system in America. That's what our investigations have shown, and we've been. I don't think you've probably seen our reporting yet on it, but I think that these consulates are dangerous, and I think that they're unnecessary, and that we should shut them down and just keep it at one embassy, maybe a second consulate on one end of the country. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the internet kind of ends the need for physical spaces like this, as it used to kind of require back in the day. And you're absolutely right. These countries have a interest in taking as much money and power out of the United States and getting it back into their home turf. Obviously, with the H-1Bs in India, that relates to a lot of this like low-skill tech work and other things. With Mexico, it's hugely the money that gets sent back via remittances from people in the United States to Mexico, which basically funds the entire south of the border. And that's their biggest kind of threat. It's about taking from out inside the U.S. and giving it elsewhere. It's parasitic in nature in a lot of ways.
Yes, it is. And Mexico's number one at over 60 billion a year, but India is at 34 or 36 billion a year. And they are both using it to float their economy. It is a massive part of their economy. Now, they have the new bill, and we'll go back to LA and general immigration. They have the new bill to tax remittances, and they dropped it when J.D. Vance proposed it. I think it was 2024, and it didn't get a bill number assigned to it. It was 10%. And I'm an extremist, but I thought 10% was too low. And now, because apparently of India's lobbying, it's been taken down to 3.5% because they're saying it's racist, or that's one of their charges. I'm pretty immune to that a racist charge now. I'm not listening to that anymore, but somebody did. Do you know where that bill is standing? I think it's a great. If it went to 10%, I think it'd be more than triply affected. But do you think that it could cut down on the number of people who want to come in and take jobs illegal in America, or take become cheap labor in America, taking Americans' jobs? Or do you think it's really just we raise a little bit of money and poke a stick in the eye of, the nations that are receiving the money? What do you think?
I think in the same kind of way the Trump administration has approached the tariff discussions, trying to get on a fair playing field with other countries in the trade arena, we should approach the kind of remittance conversations. And, that is putting the American interest first and recognizing that these countries have, they'll send their cheap labor, but they're getting, the better end of the deal, and that the money flows out of the United States and the jobs get sucked out. And so that's the way I would like to see the remittances kind of looked at. With regard to India, starting out on Capitol Hill in 2013, I would say the Indian H-1B, lobby was profoundly strong. They got to a lot of members, and they used that kind of racialized argument as well. Heard that a million different times. And, you saw a lot of politicians in that era arguing to remove the country caps on certain countries because India wanted it, gone because they wanted to get more people here. I will say, thankfully, I think that has lost its luster quite a bit.
Oh, really?
More so, a lot of prominent politicians had bills that they were pushing on this that they're no longer pushing. I'm not saying it's not a threat. I'm saying that the racialized charge no longer lands the blow that it did before. Kind of everyone made a mockery of, calling everyone a racist around the BLM era, where it's just unfortunately lost its any bite to it. And then it's kind of a joke.
Well, what I have found is that I see Congress people, I do still see senators saying we need to open the doors to H-1B and to much, much more, because we need this skilled labor, as if we do not have skilled white-collar workers. And we know the facts are that twice as many U.S. college students with degrees in STEM graduate every year, 2 times as many as there are seats, or not seats, but job opportunities in that particular year. So we are double the number of people graduating in STEM for that in relationship to the job opportunities. But then what we're doing is bringing in not that mythical 65,000 H-1B cap. We're bringing in 2.5 to 300,000. I think we've even gotten up to more than that. And what I'm wondering, is Heritage going to be working, or the Oversight Project? I'm not quite sure. I know it's a separate entity, but it's connected, I believe. Correct me on that. Are you at all working
on off from the Heritage Foundation with the support of the Heritage Foundation? So we do something functionally different. We litigate and we investigate. Heritage produces policy and then advocacy through its lobbying arms, everything else that the Heritage enterprise does.
Are you at all interested in looking at, we have some states that are looking at RICO violations, racketeering in collusion between perhaps India, we have evidence of it, and big tech here in the United States. Do you think the Oversight Project would be interested in looking at what is happening with the H-1B fraud and collusion that's happening there?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the Oversight Project's been going for about 2 years plus now. I'd say about maybe a little longer, actually. Our top 3 areas of focus thus far have been 1, election integrity, and in no particular order, by the way. 2, general weaponization of government, particularly out of the FBI. But then 3, border security and immigration enforcement. So that falls squarely into an area of existing priority. And when you talk about these kind of lobbying and RICO charges and things like that, that is certainly something that would be of interest.
Okay, well, we will get back to on that. You know, we started off talking about how you are holding the Trump administration accountable, even though you're solidly behind Trump. You know that there are forces that are always pushing, probably on almost every major policy area. Tell me about those forces in the Trump administration. How do you feel about how Kristi Noem is doing her job and Pam Bondi? Do you think that are things working out the way that you would hope that they would regarding immigration?
Yeah, well, regarding immigration, it's been a mixed messaging, and I've been very vocal about this. And recently, it's come to a boil with a lot of, we'll kindly call them moderate Republicans, but they're not. They're just Democrats who skin suit as Republicans, basically saying that immigration enforcement should only be cabined to people who commit murders or other violent crimes. And that's a very small universe of illegal in the United States. It's like 400,000 or something. And it's not mass deportations. And so there's always been this kind of tension where I knew, and a lot of other people realized, that a lot of Republicans were not of the America First agenda and actually opposed to it. Simultaneously, there's a need to keep the coalition together in voting majorities.
Yes.
And so, you have a situation over the last few months where the administration has at times had mixed messaging, where it's come out and really prioritized the criminal enforcement of illegal aliens. If you look at the Twitter feeds of the agencies and departments or the press conferences, that's what they like to talk about the most. And so it's given those, moderates permission to say, yeah, we agree with the administration and we want to limit the scope. And that's always been a problem. And it's kind of finally come to a boil now with those members writing public letters and distancing themselves from the administration. And it's a rift that I wish we would have dealt with before this reconciliation package was coming to a boil. But it can't be the situation in which the only people given permission to speak honestly and publicly about these are those kind of Republicans. What President Trump also needs are vocal patriots in the America First orbit who are saying, no, we actually are with the 77 million Americans who voted for a mass deportation agenda. We have your back. There are equal and opposite forces on both sides now. We're not just going to let the leftist Republicans be the ones out there trying to drag and pull back the Trump administration's implementation of the mandate.
I've noticed that dynamic as well. I heard, the worst first, but the word first implies there's a second. Tom Homan is, I jokingly say, well, that's not fair. Tom Homan is the sexiest man alive right now in America. And his strength and commitment and resolve on purpose has given these 77 million Americans some hope that, this will be the administration where following up to the letter and to the nth degree will be a reality. Usually, we just assume it's going to go off the cliff pretty quickly in most administrations. Words do not equal actions. But when I noticed all of these people saying, well, we're just going after, the criminals, those who have committed these heinous crimes over and over and over, and they're not saying worst first. They're just highlighting that. And I thought, did a shift in policy happen? Did something go on and it's just not being formally acknowledged, but it's just being subtly, where the ground's being prepared? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, talk about dissension or the opposing forces, and also even in congressional opposing forces, if you like. But I think that it will not just tarnish, but it will be the end of the Trump legacy if the immigration thing isn't dealt with according to promise. I believe that there will be consequences for the country, and that history will look back and say, missed opportunity, promises made, promises 1/3 made and given or fulfilled. What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, President Trump, is already a man of history, but to go down as like a legendary president of the United States, one that's a generational or century level shift in the trajectory, this administration needs to meet the mandate. And that means in the context of immigration enforcement, the largest operation in the history of the United States, millions upon millions of people removed, because the United States simply can't survive if that doesn't happen. The costs on the social welfare, the societal fabric, yes, even the crime are too big to bear, let alone the political representation that, ensure that Democrats who aren't really reproducing or recruiting or changing minds are nonetheless able to just replace their voters by importing more. And so the tension is, President Trump still hasn't asserted full control of the Republican Party. There's still a lot of folks waiting for him to go away and for it to revert back to the party of big business or foreign intervention, et cetera, trying to wait it. And so where this really comes to a boil, like right now, is there's a midterm election coming. And so the calculus is needing to be made. Is there a cover to be given to these quote unquote moderates or a primary challenger support? Do we permanently change the party to reflect the America First agenda? Or do we take the temptation of short-term victory to win the, majorities back in this midterms? Or do we, proceed to reform the party? And I'm of the mind that it actually hurts our chances in the midterms if we don't achieve these things. And so that's the ultimate calculation is, are we going to have Trump survive beyond just him being the president and having a Republican Party and a movement that reflects this like tectonic shift? Or will it just be like an aberrant kind of, blip in the overall trajectory, which it very well could be if we just keep the same cast of characters.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. In the next election, in 2026, if that strength of resolve and actual action is not clearly seen, then it's going to all be up for grabs again. The perception, I think Black America is behind President Trump. I'm looking at a lot of accounts on X, and they're coming out so solidly. I'm not talking about women, college degreed women, but I am saying that I think Black men are going to come over more and more and more to the Republican Party if they perceive that there's serious change and it's not just a political, okay, I won the White House, we won, we kept the House and the Senate, and so we were just acting politically. We were just gaslighting. I think with that people understand resolve and can respect someone even when they disagree with them. So I think the respect for Trump will grow on the other side if he's a man of his word and follows through on it. And I also want to know from you, that 77 million, do you agree that the 77 million did vote on this mandate? Yes, they voted on economy and all this, but the thing that really was the dividing line between Democrats and Republicans is the issue of what it is to be an American, and should we have, it's not just 20 million, 30 million, 40 million illegal aliens in the country. I think that that's going to be the litmus test, whether people know necessarily that it is. And I think they voted for that. So that's the one thing that he can't mess up on. Well, it's probably more than one.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I view the Trump mandate to be one of absolute just like common sense and a reckoning across even ideological lines and all demographics in this country besides college-age white women. That common sense should rule the day, and that partisan politics in the U.S. had really decayed to something that didn't reflect. And so the question is whether the 77 million who came after President Trump will stick around in the future. I think a lot of Republican strategists think the new coalition will survive post-Trump and post-Trumpism. And I don't think it will unless the common sense agenda can prove to survive impact with the political system. That means the implementation of those common sense promises. You're going to have a lot of people lose faith in government institution and politics generally if like these common sense ideas that basically make up the Trump agenda cannot translate into actual political action and results on the ground. People are just going to say, look, we tried. Trump was as out there as you could possibly humanly get in trying to get this done. But at the end of the day, why am I showing up to vote? And I think that 77 million number is going to be greatly reduced should we not put points on the board. And that's why President Trump needs all the support in the world to implement the mandate to its fullest levels. And people out there pushing back and punching back against those who are trying to drag us back to Bush-era politics.
Who are the strongest voices on our side? Because I see we are clearly on the same side that are pushing for taking that mandate to where it really should go. And that's where that is that full deportation. Who do you think are the strongest voices in any area, Congress, in advocacy, think tank organizations, news, whatever, and inside the administration that are solidly for the deportation, the realization?
Yep. One of the really practical and obvious issues is those on the right who probably support our agenda the most are the least critical publicly when those things aren't met. In other words, MAGA politicians are willing to stand up and say hey, we need to get these numbers up. Whereas on the other hand, the left-wing Republicans are willing to say you got to get these numbers down. So it's there's permission given to critics from the left as opposed to from the right, which is why what we're doing in the Oversight Project may stand out because, we're just being honest and calling it like we see it with, being very clear about our intentions that we want it to happen. And so who are the strongest voices? I think the new generation of Republicans, the younger they get and the newer they get, frankly, the better they get. Brandon Gill in Texas is a guy who I look at, I'm like, he is singing off the same song sheet. Obviously, J.D. Vance is a superstar. And there's others in the Senate who are really pushing hard. Mike Lee has, later in his career become even more vocal, more based, one might say, as based Mike Lee on Twitter and standing up. Out there in, influence world media, Tucker Carlson remains kind of just one of the biggest ideological drivers on the right. And at think tank world, I'm going to have a self-interest in saying this, but it's because it's true, is Dr. Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation, took a 50-year-old legacy kind of organization and really rejuvenated it. And I think in the spirit of this recalibration towards common sense we're seeing in American politics, then the same forces in opposition exist as they always have. Whether, to generally put it, the longer a senator or congressman has been there, or the higher in leadership, the more entrenched they're going to be to, preserve the established order and to give head nods to MAGA or America First, and while still keeping the same trajectory of the Republican parties, in the service of corporate interest or foreign intervention.
It's poison. It's utter poison. If I can't imagine that the Republican Party doesn't recognize that the Republican Party would be gone if it weren't for President Trump.
Oh, yeah.
And that they actually draw a connection between why is he in office, and it's not his hair, it's not his money. Why is he in office? And if that connection is he's in office because people want these things done. They want America first, but they want to see results. And if they don't say them, well, the Republican Party has to be fully, completely on board with the agenda. With we can always disagree. That it's all going to fall apart for them. Are they delusional? Don't they want victory?
No, I don't think so. I don't think a lot of the political class and the consultant class and the moneyed interest, and keep in mind, money still runs politics. And it's really unfortunate. They have short-term tangible interests that they're looking to achieve, as opposed to like a man of history like Trump, who's trying to change the trajectory of the country. And so I think that's a big distinguishing thing. And also, like, President Trump is irreplaceable in a few ways. Like, his bravado and patriotism on his sleeve and the way he carries himself is what distinguished him from everybody else. And his irreverence towards the political system that so many Americans hold in, contempt, I think is what makes him so functionally different. And then just speaking common sense beyond just like this jargon we've been used to of these stupid policy debates is what has landed, him in the so high esteem of so many Americans that are otherwise, not politically involved. And I think those people go away unless this is continued through the implementation of policy and proof that, hey, yeah, everyday Americans who want to put America first and just get to basic common sense can actually have a voice in shaping this country. And that's what ultimately is going to be the test.
I think national identity, I think our Judeo-Christian heritage, the scriptures that undergird all of our early founding documents and the formation of this country, I think religion is a huge issue with people. And I believe that the immigration issue is a huge issue. When I say religion, what I mean is the Judeo-Christian religion. Of course, we're talking about Christianity, but Judeo-Christian, the scripture, and all of that it's impossible for America to be America with that as solidly who we are demographically. We cannot be something other than Judeo-Christian America. I put it to Eric Metaxas. I said, Eric, if on the shores of the United States back in 1620, back in 1776, if instead we had not European Protestant Christians founding this new land, pioneers, and all of our actions and our formation were based upon that Bible that they all held in their hand. If instead it was Islam, instead if it was Hindu Indians, or if it was, I know this is an anachronism, but Chinese communists in 1776, would they have created an America? And he said, well, no. And I said, well, if they couldn't create America as the majority or only population, any one of those three, could they sustain it? And he said, absolutely not. They couldn't be dropped in as a culture, changed overnight, and therefore America could be sustained. And I said, so in 40 years, if America were something like 1/3 Judeo-Christian, 1/3 Muslim, and 1/3 Hindu, would we have America? And he said, well, of course, it would be long gone by that time. Nobody wants to talk about this because they're afraid, like people used to be afraid in 2015 and 16, to talk about so many things that now we're just openly discussing. I think we have to shift the Overton window, but we can't be afraid of talking about the religion aspect because we're afraid that because we have friends or people are in the administration, we're afraid that somebody's going to call us biased and discriminatory and a bigot. Is that too provocative for you?
No, I think that's absolutely common sense. To pretend that if the founding was compositionally made up of people of different faith backgrounds and from different places on the earth with different histories, of course it would have had a different outcome. And that goes down to the very design of the country itself and the constitutional republic and its groundbreaking nature, its reflection on natural rights and God-given liberties. It's imbued throughout the entire document and anything you read in that time period. The people like to frame the founding as this debate between like maximization of freedom, whereas that wasn't what the founders really taught. They're actually more concerned with, people not, the word they used then was licentiousness, basically, getting too far away from the faith and holding an ordered society. That was the driving kind of priorities at the time, is how to structure those two things in a balance. And that men of, faith and principle could never realize the promises of a constitutional republic. Ultimately, that's, the famous Ben Franklin quote, a republic if you can keep it. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And it's frankly why so many people of other backgrounds wanted to come to the United States in the first place. It's because that system worked. And so this notion that we have today in common, language that America is an idea and not a people, I think severely underestimates how much this country needs to value patriotism, cohesiveness, a shared history, a shared language, and yes, shared faiths. That's not to say that everyone in the country needs to be, an absolute, dedicated Christian. Not at all.
No.
But it is to say that we need to have assimilation in this country, and there needs to, in order for there to be assimilation, there needs to be a dominant thing. You cannot have assimilation without a dominant thing.
A dominant thing.
And so I think what we have or had, I hope we still have it and can revive it, worked pretty darn well, and we should keep it.
Well said. I think that the common sense connection there is that immigration matters. And you probably know very, very well that our 1924 Immigration Act that severely restricted immigration and in terms of just sheer numbers, that it exploded the middle class. The Black middle class grew by 4 times, whereas the white middle class by 2 times. And this trajectory of 40 years, 40 years of just solid prosperity and growth started to end in 1965 when they passed the new Immigration Act, which just generally opened the doors up again. It eviscerated the Black middle class, which is a particularly egregious thing in my opinion. It just in my heart, I find it very, very, I don't know, just disloyal. And I don't even think that it was something that that those men that passed that legislation were thinking. But Black America has slidden their middle class since 65, because when Americans of all colors are competing with tens and tens of millions of white-collar workers and high-paying skilled blue-collar workers, they're going to lose jobs because corporate America cares about one thing, bottom line. And so I'm wondering about scaling back immigration, how we can make this happen so that we return to the numbers that once made real sense, because you can't assimilate multi-millions of people at once. You can assimilate small portions, and it has to be diverse, not all, one culture. And then when it comes to people like Mike Lee, who I love his account, just hearing what base Mike Lee has to say. But Mike Lee and Ron Johnson and Vivek Ramaswamy have stated that they're very much for opening up H-1B. Well, H-1B equals 2 things. It equals displacing Americans, suppressing their wages, and it also always results in offshoring. So why are these Republican senators that are some of the ones that we admire the most? I know Vivek is no longer a senator, but or not in Congress. Why are they misled about what the impact of H-1B is?
Yeah, I think there's this ingrained notion into a lot of the political class's mind of illegal bad, legal good. And that's the dividing line. And they forget that most Americans don't really see it. I mean, maybe push to argument, they'll retreat to that line, but it's more about just quantity and even quality and impact on their lives. And so just if you were to solve all the legal immigration, like President Trump has virtually, sealed the border, you still have the same problems manifesting in the overuse of the legal system. And I think it gets uncomfortable for a lot of politicians who've spent their entire, adult lives operating on that kind of notion of all legal good, and I'm here to say all legal bad. And that's where you can start picking holes, and industry and others have been able to manipulate that weakness on ideological lines.
Yeah, they really have manipulated. That's a good word for it, because they see our weakness in that there's a lot of fear in talking about it. And 2, there's the believing of the line of that we do not have enough skilled white collar graduates from major, our elite universities and across the board, and skilled blue collar. None of those numbers are true. Going back to sort of the resolution of this mass deportation and how President Trump is probably receiving a lot of pushback on the intent as stated during the campaign. How do we do the largest mass deportation in the history of the world? How do we do it? Because I really admire what Homan has done thus far, and ICE and all law enforcement on getting out the most egregious criminals. But when you're dribbling and drabbling, and I know he wants to do so much more, there's got to be a point at which we're I guess repatriating is like what I like to call it. Just millions every year, many millions every year. How are we going to get to that point?
So it looks like massive worksite enforcement and turning off all of the reasons why illegal aliens want to be the United States, whether it's access to healthcare, education systems for their kids, welfare in the states, the enforcement of laws that have gone unenforced, transporting or harboring illegal aliens. It looks like a full-scale expression of the government's forces, both stick and carrot, to make sure that illegal aliens don't want to be here in the first place. And you don't get those numbers unless most illegal aliens understand that it is in their interest to not be, and that they're subject to deportation. And when you tell the illegal alien community that you're only going to be subject to deportation for now, if you commit a heinous crime, you're telling the tens of millions there's no reason to fear at all. And you can just go on existing as you always have. And another important thing to understand is the worst first principle, which I understand it's, communications appeal. It's a safe space. Takes more resources than the other things I've mentioned. Going after hardened criminals has all sorts of law enforcement concerns. I mean, look, the military National Guard is deployed to LA right now. I couldn't have my point made more dramatically clear about what's happening in LA, just going after the hardened criminals. And so you see the numbers get up when you see worksite enforcement cut off and people not able to illegally earn income to send back to their home country, and business not being able to profit from exploiting.
Let's talk about a few specifics. My middle name is E-Verify. So I do not understand this. I love the story of Barbara Jordan, a Democrat, many years ago, and the Jordan Commission, as it came to be called. And she was a Black Democrat, the first Black woman or Black person, I think, to ever give the keynote or to speak the Democrat National Convention. She had a voice of authority, not just because she had a deep voice, but it was profoundly authoritative. And she made really strong recommendations. And though I would disagree with her on probably most policies, we were really, really close. We would be considered really, really close on immigration. She said, if it's not for the national interest, we shouldn't be doing it. And anyway, they gutted her verification system that she recommended after she passed, before it was actually passed into law. What came to be known as E-Verify was a Barbara Jordan Commission recommendation, and they thought that all American businesses should be required to verify employment, whether or not a person was legally able to be employed by a business. And then they immediately cut that down to government workers, which is just so unthinkably, that should already have been. The government should not be employing illegals or those who do not have the right to work. Can President Trump, do you, first agree or do you disagree that as far as mass deportations and self-deportation, if the employers were held accountable, really accountable, and there were consequences, but if E-Verify was used across the board, that it would cause the biggest wave of self-deportations, because once you have to, you lose your job, even though some could work under the table, once you lose your job, you have no reason for being here anymore if you can't get welfare or whatever. And then number two, can President Trump push this through an executive order forcing some kind of legal response or congressional response? What can be done with E-Verify? Just give me your thoughts.
Yeah, reprioritization of enforcement operations as it relates to worksite enforcement. I mean, the tools are there. E-Verify certainly could be improved. I mean, the way I look at it, how many times do you have to verify certain things with the government for everything you do in your daily life? This libertarian notion that like we shouldn't use it for employment, to me, it just doesn't make any sense. If we're going to have an America First agenda, proof of citizenship needs to be like a central feature of a lot of things, because if we're going to serve Americans, we have to know who we're serving first, and whether that's citizenship or legal status. And I'd apply that to voting as well. It's just common sense. But President Trump has the authority to really ramp up worksite enforcement. It would just look like changing the focus from, the hardened criminals to applying ICE's limited resources to going to employers and really making it known in the business community that you're subject to actual enforcement of this, not just like random spot checks where you can roll the dice and know a few people made example of, but making it known it's more likely than not that if you continue to do this, you're going to get fined and your workers are going to have to go home. And then the workers will start to realize, as you've mentioned, but they're never going to self-deport until they recognize that it's, more likely than not, staying here isn't worth it.
But with E-Verify, I know that E-Verify, according to law, probably can't be used because it's not strong enough. It doesn't require all employers across the United States, say with 10 or more employees, to just go on simply. It literally takes seconds. I've been in the system. You just put in the social security number, whatever, and it pops out, yes, legal, otherwise, no, do not hire. And it's that quick. HR is a long and laborious issue as an employer. I know that. It's too complex, but that doesn't add anything to it. So unless we have E-Verify forcing employers to say, I will proactively check to see whether all my current employees and my future employees are legally able to work in the United States of America or permitted to, then I don't think that we're going to get half as much bang out of the workforce on-site enforcement, because it's still a huge amount of resources that have to go to every one of those meat packing plants, for instance. So is there any way to do something quickly that will force E-Verify, national emergency, some kind of executive order that declares that this is going to be that is necessary to deal with this national emergency that we are seeing?
I'm sure there is. I don't have the answer to the top of my head, but the different lanes you're kind of speaking of, I don't know why you could not go down. The border bill from last Congress, HR 2, had E-Verify improvement provisions in there, which were taken out. And so that shows you like the political resistance to this, because obviously the industry implications. But I'm sure there's certainly more that could be done, just executive branch authority alone. And one thing that we got to deal with is, the garbage in, garbage out type thing of E-Verify is fake documents or stolen documents can be used, and how to make improvements to address for that. I'm certain that could be handled in a way that doesn't require new authorities, but lots to think about there.
Have you given any thought to the fact that visa overstays are a massive, massive problem? And is there any real way to target them? They came in on a visa. We've got this Egyptian lighting Americans on fire. An Egyptian who's brought his entire family, and he's here illegally. They're here illegally. They're burning Americans in American cities. And he was just a visa overstay, just came in as a tourist. B1 and B2 are both completely misused or result in a high rate of visa overstay. Is there a way to target them? Or maybe I'm working outside of your wheelhouse because I'm talking about real world enforcement.
No, I think that's great. And to the Trump administration's credit, they have, made a habit of basically informing visa holders or visa overstays that they're no longer welcome. And the question is, like, when is that met with, like, scaled enforcement action? And yeah, as you know, like visa overstays are a huge portion of the illegal population in the U.S. And the administration has also tightened up who can come in. Like, to me, it makes zero sense that we allow so many Chinese students into the United States to basically just pay full freight tuition so the college endowments can grow. But you work against the national interest in a lot of ways. And it's obviously a CCP agenda item to get as many college students in as possible. And we've seen the consequences of that. So you got to look at all these categories as part of the enforcement agenda.
You know, the Pew Research came out with some numbers that were utterly shocking that, but actually in a way not surprising because of how strong the push is, but that there are 750,000 or so Indian overstays. And then, of course, CCP and then Mexican. And I am of the mind that Americans do not look at each one of these areas. Islam, I know that's a kind of a big, broad, subject, or I mean, many, many states. And then India, well, actually, Southern Asia, if you're looking at India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, China, communist, and also Mexico, even though south of the border. These are foreigners. These are sometimes or often incompatible cultures, especially if there's no assimilation, which high numbers prevent. Now, of course, Mexico is, Christian, so I didn't mean to cast aspersions there in any way, but still, I think that these visa overstays, if the President Trump went to his counterparts and said to Modi, to these Latin American countries, to Muslim countries that we are friendly with, obviously he won't be chatting with Iran, and saying, look, this is a problem, but you could help us by literally, I was picturing President Trump saying to Modi, and Modi doing this, doing a broadcast or something on, X. In other words, I'm speaking to Indian nationals who've overstayed their visas in America. America's a valuable ally. I want the trust of President Trump in our country, which is what we're asking for. I would like you to come home, and we will come and pick you up with all of our airlines. I mean, and that could be done with, leaders across the board. I know that's kind of a ridiculous idea that anybody would do something like that would really benefit America, but we've got to get these guys out. Is there a way to ramp up the visa overstays being expelled?
I think you hit it on its head, and this was really the genius of the second half of the first Trump administration when Congress wouldn't give them wall money, and they decided to use the foreign policy levers to address border security questions. The same theory could be applied towards the visa overstay population.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like that. Governors, do you have any confidence in the governor of Texas? Because I do not. When I look at the numbers in Texas, I see whole cities that are just like California, though they're not Hispanic controlled. Like, in other words, cities that used to be 90% white and